Now we're recording. But anyway, so the madness is a good thing when it's given by the gods, and he says the prophetess of Delphi and the priestess at Dodona are out of their minds when they perform that fine work of theirs for all of Greece, either for an individual person or for a whole city. But they accomplish little or nothing when they're in control of themselves. We will not mention the Sibyl or the others who foretell many things by means of God-inspired prophetic trances and give sound guidance to many people. That would take too much time for a point that's obvious to everyone. But here's some evidence worth adding to our case. The people who designed our language in the old days never thought of madness as something to be ashamed of or worthy of blame. Otherwise, they would not have used the word manic for the finest experts of all, the ones who foretell the future, thereby weaving insanity into prophecy. They thought it was wonderful when it came as a gift of the god, and that's why they gave its name to prophecy. But nowadays, people don't know the fine points, so they stick in a T and call it mantic. Similarly, the clear-headed study of the future, which uses birds and other signs, was originally called oionistic, since it uses reasoning to bring intelligence, nous, and learning, historia, into human thought. But now more modern speakers call it oionistic, putting on airs with their long O. The extent then that prophecy, mantic, is more perfect and more admirable than sign-based prediction, oionistic, in both name and achievement, madness from a god is finer than self-control of human origin, according to the testimony of the ancient language givers. Next, madness can provide relief from the greatest plagues of trouble that beset certain families because of their guilt for ancient crimes. It turns up among those who need a way out. It gives prophecies and takes refuge in the prayers to the gods and in worship, discovering mystic rites and purifications that bring the man it touches through to safety for this and all time to come. So it is that the right sort of madness finds relief from present hardships for a man that is possessed. Third comes the kind of madness that is possession by the Muses, which takes a tender virgin soul and awakens it to a Bacchic frenzy of songs and poetry that glorifies the achievements of the past and teaches them to future generations. If anyone comes to the gates of poetry and expects to become an adequate poet by acquiring expert knowledge of the subject without the Muses' madness, he will fail, and his self-controlled verses will be eclipsed by the poetry of men who have been driven out of their minds. Um, so those are the three kinds, and of course the fourth then is the erotic madness, which is the subject of the whole speech. So these three kinds are the mantic or prophetic, then this one that's going to be called theurgic, which is the one about purifying ancestral guilt, and then the third is the one of the muses. And before we saw this, this is just as a text, one of the supports for thinking that you could find in Plato an idea that there's something better than nous, there's something better than reason. And of course, this is a key passage for Iamblichus and others, and that's the passage that Hermeias is going to be talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the text with you?
It's the one second. Page 145, you said?
134. 134.
Oh, okay. Oh, it got stuck now. What's this all about? What is this all about? Oh, okay. For indeed, and we're in 15, right? Line 15.
Mm-hmm.
For indeed, both the prophetess at Delphi, we shall elucidate the detail of the text later. But since Plato here teaches of four kinds of madness, that is to say, kinds of inspiration or possession by gods, namely, muse engendered, musicos, telestic, um, that was the is it theurgic one,
The third, yeah, the third one.
mantic, and erotic. Before talking of each individually, we must first state with regard to inspiration which part of the soul it is that is inspired. So, which part it is, and whether every part of it is, maybe it's all of them, and whether all inspiration comes from gods, and in which part of the soul this occurs, or whether it is in something else superior to the soul. Where precisely then is inspiration properly and primarily so called uh, located, and what exactly is it?
Yeah. So here he's obviously referring, there's some kind of debate and there are settled questions about what to discuss when you talk about inspiration. So which part of the soul, so does it affect like the imagination? Does it affect reason? Is it the whole soul? Right. Does it all come from the gods, or is there maybe you want to distinguish between inspiration from gods and daimonis? Maybe from gods and evil daimonis, right? And whether it's in the soul properly, or maybe something superior to the soul. Maybe if we have like if we have a belief that we have a nous that's or like our true self, that's our nous that is superior to soul as what gives life to our body, then maybe that's where inspiration happens. The first thing that he says, we shall elucidate the detail of the text later. So that's something that we saw um, a few times also in the Phaedrus commentary, right? So sometimes Damascus would first give a general theory, right? So that's the name for this kind of passage, a theoria. It's a contemplation on the subject discussed. So, for instance, before he discussed the individual words that Plato used to talk about the virtues, he gave us that summary of the whole theory of virtues and all its many levels. So here also Hermeias is saying, well, let's first talk about the general theory of madness before we go into the details of the text on madness.
So, sort of before the text, right?
Yeah,
Okay, now, there are two parts to the rational soul: discursive thought and opinion. Okay? And again, in the case of discursive thought, the lowest part is called, and is in the strict sense, discursive thought. And the highest, which is also called its intellect, is that in accordance with which the soul first and foremost becomes intellective, and is what some have also called potential intellect. Hmm?
right. So here this is interesting where the intellect in the soul is seen as a part of dianoia, part of discursive thought. And so, of course, what some have called potential intellect, that would be Aristotle. Right? I guess this is he is adding some interpretation of De Anima 3:4 here, where um, the potential intellect would be our capacity to form concepts and to apprehend the forms of things. And it's a properly Aristotelian point of view to say that this is merely potential. And of course, Aristotle argues for this that you have to have something without any form to be able to grasp all the forms. Um, but Platonists would say that you actually have all the concepts innate, and that's why you can apprehend them. So they, it, so the some have called potential intellect. It's probably not a Platonist view he's referring. Now, it's interesting that the nous intellect of the rational soul is part of discursive thought, right? So this we can think of the two ways that nous shows up in discursive thought in Neoplatonist accounts. One is the Aristotelian thing that nous needs to give you your primitive terms and axioms, right? So demonstration has to start from somewhere, and this has to be from what nous grasps. Um, but there's also a role for nous after you've finished, your demonstrative science, where you synthesize, you have a single insight that synthesizes all the results of that science. And so that comes at the end um, of discursive thought. So that's probably the idea of nous here. It's one of these two.
And that's the higher part, right? That's what Aristotle, what he says is identifying with potential intellect, or at least like Aristotle is talking about this same kind of capacity. just has a
Yeah,
different understanding of what it is.
yeah.
And the lower part is just regular discursive thought, like questions and answers and things like that.
Right. Well, yeah. The lower part is regular discursive thought, and that doesn't have a direct insight into these truths. The and that has to do with inferring one thing from another, arguing from one thing to another. And then opinion. So this is perhaps merits observation that opinion is here part of the rational soul. So opinion here um, might very well be what it's already means in Proclus, but it's just the capacity for judgment, for you're saying A is B, right? So when you recognize that something is an apple, and right, but you still don't know why it's an apple, what are the causes of apple? You just say here is an apple, and you synthesize all these um, perceptual qualities in it, that it's green and tasty and so on and heavy, then you say then that's opinion, right? Already.
Right? Does it have to do with the Plato's thing that opinion is about things that don't really exist and so on?
Yeah, so I mean it does have to do with that in some sense, but it's a bit stronger than you would expect from just a reading of Plato, because there isn't this idea that opinion is always necessarily that you might get from Plato. The opinion is necessarily deceives you or something like that. It's just that it doesn't give you the cause of things. It just says that things are such and such without giving you the cause. Whereas, the things that Nous knows, these things that Nous knows self-evidently, they are self-explanatory. So when Nous knows that they are the case, it or also knows why they are the case because they explain themselves.
Okay. So these are turns out to be three uh, parts of the
Indeed.
soul, or three parts of. Okay, rational here is mainly as opposed to the super rational that we're madness, right? That we're going to get at.
Right, and also opposed to the irrational. So he hasn't mentioned the powers of perception or the imagination or the affects. Things.
Hmm. Okay. The thing that you're noting is that there should be also like a nous that's beyond the rational, right? Than intellect itself. That he's talking about like
Yeah,
intellect, which is in something like that.
he'll talk about that soon. So that's also like one reason to say potential intellect, right? They're saying it's not the real intellect,
Okay.
right? For this intellect has a power.
Like in Kabbalah terms, there would be Chachma as nous, Bina as discursive thought, and then something like the highest sense of Bina, which is sometimes called the 50th gate, which is um, the nous as it in the end of discursive thought, or something like that.
Okay. Is there like a first gate, which would be like the
The
lowest part of Bina, which would be like opinion here or something?
Yeah, I don't know. There's also Das, which nobody knows what it's supposed to be usually, but I think might be opinion.
Okay.
Like we have Chachmat Vunadat in
Ah,
the
okay.
Bible often, and they yeah, people are very confused about what the third thing is, but I think that that's probably what it would be.
Okay.
And then beyond that,
Um,
it's something like Keter or whatever, different versions of Chachma where it's entirely separate. A lot of confusion about that
hmm.
also.
Well, let's continue then.
Okay. Um, Now, so this is called okay. And there is yet another part above this that is the highest and most unified part of the entire soul, that wants what is good for all things and always devotes itself to the gods and is ready to bring about whatever they wish. Yeah, this is called one of the soul, and bears the image of the one above being, right, the intellect and everything, giving unity to the entire soul.
Um, right. So this is the famous, well, as he calls it, the one of the soul. That's how we find it in other texts as well, which is so it's interesting here how he highlights like the two a few different sides of it. So on the one hand, it's the highest and most unified part of the soul, and it gives unity to the entire soul. Right? So Proclus will say that this is what makes us say I and I want, right? It's what you associate all your different activities and powers to a single self. So that's one thing that it does. At the same time, it wants what is good for all things and always devotes itself to the gods and is ready to bring about whatever they wish. Let me just check something here. So we're near 85. Um, and right, right, yeah. So it wants what is good. It wants the goods for all things. So this capacity that unites the whole soul around a single self, it's actually a desiderative capacity, right? You actually want unity, right? It's not like a unity that's given, it's a unity that you're constructing, you're pursuing the one, and that's what actually gives unity to everything you do because you're always pursuing the good in some sense. Um, and it bears the image of the one above being. So this being an image of the one, um, s- so it it associates with this idea that the gods they have these signatures in beings, and that's how they can be present in like theurgic rituals and so on. So this one of the soul is, as it were, the imprint of a god in the soul. Um, so there are these different uh, sides to it. So our striving for the good, which unites us, is at the same time something that marks us off as the effect of the one. Right?
Okay. Meaning something like it cannot be entirely explained if there wasn't the one.
Yeah, yeah, something like the way that you could not explain a portrait of someone without knowing who the portrait was of, or without having the concept of a human being, because you couldn't organize the that what you were seeing as a portrait of a human being. So also there's this inherent reference to unity in this desire for the good.
What would it be different than the like one being in everything, like the first proposition and the like there, everything has unity and
So this is not different from that. This is just how the unity is in the soul. Right. This is the soul's particular way of being one.
so meaning that the particular way in that it like unites all the parts of the person and has this like desire, or maybe or the human kind's
Right.
desire.
Yeah. So, and like there are then analogous things in when you find the one in a flower or in a rock, right? Because of the propositions that the one is identical with the good.
Okay. Um, so here that it is indeed necessary that things be this way, we may learn from the following. On the one hand, the rational soul exists thanks to all the causes prior to it. That is to say, thanks to intellect and gods. But on the other, it also exists thanks to itself, since it perfects itself. Now, insofar then it has its existence from gods, it possesses the One, which unifies and unites into one all of its powers and all of its plurality. And which first receives goods from the gods, and then renders the whole substance of the soul boniform, since it is thereby bound to the gods and united to them. So again, it has the causes, it has itself, from from its from its being because or thanks to, as he says, it's gods. It has the one. Um, okay, and insofar it exists thanks to intellect, it possesses intellection, as a result of which it grasps the forms by means of simple intuitions and not discursively. In that it is also joined to the intellect above it. That's what makes it able to grasp the forms, not only discursively. And insofar as it also causes itself to exist, it possesses the capacity for discursive thought, as a result of which it generates sciences and ideas and operates discursively and argues for conclusions from premises.
Right. So, yeah, this is all, um, yeah, it's knowing the presence of these powers and the causes of the soul, and the thing that it perfects itself, that therefore it exists thanks to itself, that refers to that idea that everything that if something is the cause of its own good, well, becoming, being good is, being well. It's actually being maximally. And therefore, for you to be the cause of your own good, you have to be the cause of your own being in some sense. And therefore, it perfects it. Since it perfects itself, it exists thanks to itself. And that it perfects itself, is seen in this activity of discursive thought, right? Because it just by acting on its own, it goes from having, as it were, like confused and latent ideas, and then it, by articulating its thought through dialogue and reasoning, it then unfolds, sciences, right? Sciences yeah, idea is a good translation for theorema. Theorema would be things you can learn, right? Individual things that are learnable. And and so, from these two premises, it then unfolds a bunch of conclusions, and therefore it's perfecting itself. With regard to the intellection, right, so we grasp the forms by means of a simple intuition, so that's not discursively, and as I mentioned, that can come at the beginning or the end of science. But it's interesting that it says it is also joined to the intellect above it. So that's so if we take that as meaning exactly the intellect that is exactly above it, it could mean the daimon, right? The daimon is a separately existing nous that accompanies the soul, so that it could mean the daimon. Um, and there were people who thought that it's the daimon who is the active intellect, right? That actualizes our capacity for knowing. Um, right. And that the description here about the one doesn't really bring us more things besides the fact that, yeah, it doesn't really bring us anything new prior to it. Just that, there is a one of the soul because it is produced by the one. So it's the point that you brought up, that it's not different from the unity discussed in Proposition 1. It's the unity that everything has insofar as it depends on the gods or the one.
And meaning, right, the proper thing to soul is this discursive thought, like that's the level of the soul, so to speak. And then
Exactly that. Yeah.
these higher things like intellect and oneness are sort of like the nous and the God in the soul, something like that.
Ex- exactly. So
Um,
you can see this as an application of Proposition 65. right? That one that everything exists either in the cause or in itself or in participation, right? And then the soul will exist, will have, discursive thought in the way in itself, right? Katuparksin in its own existence, but then it has the one and the nous through participation.
Right. Okay. Um, now, um, okay. Four, that it does also cause itself to exist. Oh, we did that.
No,
It's
no,
clear from
we
the fact
haven't.
that it also perfects itself, or that way you explained. Four, a thing that brings itself to perfection and furnishes itself with well-being will much more so furnish itself with being, for well-being is superior to being. So if it furnishes itself with what is superior, it will all the more furnish itself with what is inferior. Okay. That's on the soul being self-caused, which is like the soul being able to learn by itself, things like that.
Exactly.
I guess that's
Exactly.
the like way in which all normal people think souls are self-caused. Because like when you hear self-caused, that sounds weird. When like, well, do you think you learn anything? Well, then yourself there's some self-causing.
Right, but but the point here is like if you learn by yourself, then the argument is like if you learn by yourself, then you must be in some way responsible for yourself. So the you can't um it's not it's not just that the end results, once you've learned something and then you brought that thing to yourself, because that would be just the well-being, the good. He's saying that if you can give something to yourself and that thing is good for you, then it belongs to what you are, and so you're in some sense responsible for what you are, right? So yeah, so if you can learn by yourself, then that means that even before you started learning, you are somehow causing yourself, giving yourself this character, which is the character of like thinking in time and things like that.
And that is because
Well, if you if you learned by yourself, right? If you could make yourself better, but you weren't responsible for your own existence, then what you could give to yourself would be something foreign to your own existence. You would be doing something artificial or maybe even violent to yourself by changing yourself this way, and that wouldn't be good for you. However, since it is good for you, then you're adding, as it were, to your own nature, and so you have to be responsible for your own nature in some sense.
so it's based on this idea that perfection or goodness is something that is good for the what you are, not something like that is added. Like that then it wouldn't
Exactly.
be good. It would be maybe even bad or destructive.
Yeah.
Um, and but I don't understand the next step. Like, and therefore, like, why can't someone have like his being from someone else and then add this perfection, like one more level or something like that? Like, why? He said that it's like
Well,
a fortiori. If you add the superior, I didn't get that.
well, the if you had your being exclusively from someone else, and then if you to add to your being more is to be closer to the cause, right? Um that's the argument that you get in the elements of theology. So um to become more, to be more is to be closer to the causes of our being. So if you were if you have your being exclusively from someone else, then the only way for you to become more is for you to be closer or, more similar or more able to receive the influence of that cause. If you can, however, grow by just becoming more yourself and more like yourself, then that's because you yourself must be a cause of being for you. So um, the idea of like, well, why can't I just add to what someone else gives me is because, well, adding is being in connection with with a certain cause, right? And that cause is if that cause is yourself, as you are adding to yourself, then you have to already be producing yourself in some sense.
I only halfway understand, but okay. Something like you can't be adding, if adding is becoming more yourself or better as what you are, we could say like better at being what you are, something like that. Um, then being the cause of that would have to be being the cause of what you are, something like that.
Yeah, because adding is just being closer to the cause of you, and if you are adding and if you are adding to yourself, and if you are becoming better at being what you are, then and you are doing this just by relating to yourself and not by relating to some other thing, then you have to already be your own cause.
And this being your own cause would again mean in precisely this sense of being the kind of thing that can have discursive thought. Because the being,
Yeah.
as in the sense of higher things, do not belong to you.
Exactly. So, for instance, that you exist, that you want the good, that you strive towards the good, that that you have this intellective capacity of grasping forms, all this depends on other things, right? On these higher things. What depends on you is being a discursive thinker.
Right, and that must be already you for you to be able to get become better at that by that, something like that.
Yeah.
Or is also like the proper thing of souls to reach like to reach intellect by discursive thinking.
Right.
So like not only becoming more like okay, I guess that's what becoming better at being you is, becoming more like your causes, which is beyond you.
Right. So there's a scale of virtues here, like we discussed. So you first become the best you, which is the purificatory virtues, right? You're separating yourself from your body and you're just discovering that, you can just think on your own with math and things like that. And then that will then allow you also to be more, to receive the influence of nous more, then you become more noetic, you get the contemplative virtues and so on.
Okay. So now we're going to. So the inspiration that is primarily and properly speaking and truly from God's occurs in connection with this one of the soul that is above discursive thought and above the intellect in it, in the soul, a one that is at other times like someone who is exhausted and asleep. But when this one is illuminated, the whole of life, the intellect, discursive thought, and irrational parts of the soul, is illuminated, and a reflection of the inspiration is granted all the way down to the body itself.
Right. So this is interesting. So this is all in service of answering the question that he had put previously, like where precisely then is inspiration properly and primarily so called located, and what exactly is it? So it says that the one of the soul is normally like someone who is exhausted and asleep. So normally our capacity to unify ourselves is exhausted and asleep. So we normally are not one, but then this when inspiration happens, then we somehow the whole of our life with all of its parts is um, is illuminated, it says. Illumination here is, I mean, illumination, reflection, these are their terms, but they're tricky terms, right? Because the um, they suggest a cognitive relationship. But of course, this has to be more than cognitive because it's the one beyond nous. Why is he using illumination if it's not cognitive? It's because of the Republic, right? The good is like the sun. And um, and before we had this expression, he used boniform, if I remember correctly. Yes. Um, Insofar as it has existed from the one, from the gods, it possesses the one which unifies and unites all into one all of its powers and all of its plurality, and which first receives goods from gods and renders um, the whole substance of the soul boniform. So this boniform is agatho eides, so that's literally has the form of the good, but this is constructed in the way parallel to what how Plato describes the eye um, uh, in the Republic, where he says the eye is the thing that's most sun-like in us, right? And so it makes us, and so since the sun is the good, then in this analogy, so the Neoplatonists constructed both agatho eides, and in other contexts they also use heno eides. So it's all referring to this Republic passage. But in any case, when so we can understand this when this one is illuminated, it's not that it understands something, but that it is somehow active, when as opposed so illumination here is also as opposed to asleep, you're awake, right? You are acting and not in a state of potentiality. And then the whole of life here is illuminated by the good. So everything in life is directed towards, you know, uh, wanting the good and helping the God and so on. And he says all the way down to the body. So this is going to be the primary kind of inspiration, which is primarily and properly speaking and truly from the gods. Right?
Right. So like this, in other words, if you say that it's the one in the soul, then the question is raised like, how is this state of madness uh, different than just being alive, which is also having this one in you? And then their answer is something like, usually it's asleep.
Right. This thing about us being asleep or not being well, it's also something that they use, for instance, in the Alcibiades commentary when he's talking about the logoi in us, and where he says that they're barely breathing or they're drowning or something like that. And to explain, well, you always have these logoi, these innate concepts. So why don't you always know? Well, we always do have them active, but and that's why we have like all these bad opinions. We naturally produce these opinions, and but they're confused because the logoi haven't been properly articulated and organized and so on. These innate concepts. So there's this distinction, there's going to be a distinction between like a low functioning, like base functioning unity of the soul, because in some sense we're always one. But then there are moments when we actualize our unity to the fullest extent, right? But as you say, this is something that he has to cash out, and it connects with something else that he should also give an explanation for, is that the these people who are said to be mad are said to be out of their minds. So it seems actually like a moment of division, right? They're separated from themselves somehow, right? And it's not clear how when someone is, and you think of this like also in the case of, for instance, erotic madness, where people seem to be acting against the good or against their best interests when they're in love, right? And so there seems to be some kind of opposition here, and not a unification of themselves. So he still has to explain once he's given this abstract account how this then makes sense of the concrete kinds of madness. That will then properly also explain in what sense the one is awake in these situations and not asleep, right?
Okay. But so this we did. So that's the one kind of inspiration, or the highest, the truly divine kind. Other kinds of inspiration also occur in connection with the other parts of the soul, when certain daimons or even gods, though not without the participation of daimons, stimulate it. For example, discursive thought is said to be inspired when it discovers sciences and ideas in a flash and before anyone else. And opinion and imagination.
Your your voice went out.
Did it? Oh,
Oh, now
do
now
you
you're
hear me
back.
now?
Yeah.
Something is broken with the mic. I don't know. Nothing in this world is perfect, unfortunately.
You were at, for example.
Okay. So, for example, discursive thought is said to be inspired when it discovers sciences and ideas in a flash and before anyone else. So he's saying there are also inspiration in discursive thought. Um, Somehow, I don't know. And opinions and imagination are said to be inspired when they invent techniques and produce incredible works like Phidias in the sculptor's craft and others in other crafts. And as Homer also said of the maker of the baldric, may he, having fashioned it, not fashion anything else. Because it's the best thing, something like that. I'm not sure how that has to do with inspiration.
Right.
Um, and the spirited part is said to be inspired when it is abnormally aroused in battle. As we say, ran amok, as when spear wielding Ares something. And if someone, because he fancied it, ate something that reason forbade, and subsequently, contrary to expectation, remained healthy, you might also say that the fancy, so the desire, right, appetite, epithumia, was in an ill-defined way inspired. And so inspiration also occurs in connection with the other parts of the soul.
Right. So the other parts of the soul, they can also be inspired. How when daimonists stimulate them. What's proper to these all, it seems like that they are, in some sense, they do things that are better than they would able to normally, right? So discursive thought, when you have a flash of insight, um, and then opinion and imagination when you have a idea of a new invention in art or a craft. And even the thumos when you're like super brave in battle, or also even appetite, right? And he's like, this seems to be more like a hypothetical, but it's like someone who eats something that they shouldn't, and for some reason. And it's important here that he says that they remained healthy, right? So in all these things, the result is good, right? So it's not that you become really, if you go berserk in battle, you run amok, and but then that's turns out to be bad. You end up, killing your comrades or something like that. That wouldn't count here as inspiration, I take it. Um, and so all of these are particular, right? They're particular to these individual parts of the soul, and they don't affect the whole soul because they are not of the one of the soul that unites the whole soul, right? And why are they daimonic? Well, because they are not, if it was strictly through the gods, then since the gods are unities, they affect our unity. Um, Daimonis, however, they are they're they are in the first place noes, or separately existing providences or sciences. However, they also have they have souls, immortal lives um that change according to that noes. So they're like applying the that providence in the world, and they're said to also have things like a pneumatic body, right? So a body that can be perceived in imagination, right? And so in that way, they can suggest images into us. They can make us hear or think or hear or see things. So that explains, for instance, how they can perhaps give us ideas for technique, for crafts. So like an image appears in our mind. Since they are rational souls as well, it also makes it clear how they can like give us a certain flash of insight, a certain insight, and the and even since they have these imaginal bodies, they can probably cause us to like have a desire for a certain food or something like this. This is all going to be for the best because they are Noahs ultimately. They do these particular things for the sake of or organized by this separately existing science of how things should be. And these are then inspirations. However, um, um, they don't affect the whole soul because they're not affecting the one of the soul because they themselves are not separately existing unities.
Okay. But there is like like the question here is like this whole argument, Plato's whole argument is something like we don't think that rational poets are writing good poems and so on, and therefore there's something of madness or beyond like self-control, which you called, right? Beyond Sophrosine, self-controlled, reasoned control, something like that, like what we call a reasonable person, in all these great works or something like that. And uh, I guess like what makes it inspired or mad is also some kind of greater wholeness, right? So like one definition for like intuition or something like that is seeing the conclusions without the middle terms, right? Something like if someone paints step by step, then it'll be some it wouldn't be as good as if someone is like inspired and somehow sees the whole picture at once, and somehow we say that is caused by a daimon or something like that, because it's not the power of the like discursive soul being able to like reason through his way through that technique. Is that the
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's a good way of putting it. Also, it is interesting, of course, that the madness of the muses is mentioned um, in the Phaedrus, and that's going to be a true madness, right? Because one of the ones that's mentioned there and it's connected to the gods explicitly in the text. But that will be distinct from this opinion imagination inspired when they invent techniques and produce incredible works. So that's interesting. So that not necessarily every kind of artistic inspiration is going to be, divine inspiration. It could be daimonic inspiration. Um, but we'll have to read on to figure out what the distinction is.
okay? But so these are inspiration that occurs in connection with the other parts of the soul. But inspiration, properly speaking, and in the true sense, is when this one of the soul that is above intellect is awakened to the gods and receives inspiration from that source. However, at different times, it is possessed by different gods in accordance with its propensities. And is possessed by different gods in accordance with its propensities, and it is possessed to a greater or lesser degree according as it is intellect or discursive thought that is aroused. He repeated this 3 times, I'm not sure. So, just as
Um, yeah, yeah, continue
let
reading.
me finish it. Just as when we ask what philosophy is, but are imprecise and use terminology incorrectly, we often refer to mathematics or natural science or ethics as philosophy and science. So too it is with inspiration. So like we use the term loosely. For we are wont to talk of inspiration even though it is imagination that is stimulated. However, those who attribute inspiration to bodily constitutions or to favorable atmospheric conditions or to different types of exhalations or the stability of the times or places or to the actions of the bodies that revolve in the heavens, so like astrological, like giving correct times and things like that, are talking about the contributory and material causes of the phenomenon rather than its causes, properly speaking. Okay, I'm
Right.
ready. I get too far. Let's stop before that.
So, um, so the he first makes this point, so he goes back to about the true inspiration is the one that it's when the one of the soul is possessed. However, this one of the soul can be can be possessed by different gods, and therefore there are different kinds of inspiration, right? So this is also from the text where there's the muse madness and the Bacchic madness and the mantic madness and so on, and the erotic madness to do with eros. So different gods give different madnesses, right? This we would expect from a reading of the Phaedrus. And then this other thing that it is possessed to a greater or lesser degree according as it is intellect or discursive thought that is aroused, that is something a bit more puzzling to me. But presumably it's maybe the might be something like, I don't know, the madness of the muses goes all the way to discourse. It goes because the the one of the soul is going to be have to be aroused. And then he says, well, maybe intellect and discursive thought is aroused. So maybe sometimes the just the one of the soul is aroused, is active. Sometimes the one of the soul with intellect. Sometimes the one of the soul with intellect and discursive thought. Maybe that's the idea. And then he says, well, and then he gets into this digression about how we use this terminology incorrectly. So he says, like, sometimes when we ask what philosophy is, we often refer to mathematics or natural science or ethics as philosophy and science. So presumably it's because if you give the wrong definition of philosophy, you're going to end up giving a a definition that actually fits mathematics or natural science or ethics. So, for instance, if you say that philosophy is the study of the good, right, and then you'll end up with ethics. Or if you say that philosophy is the study of separate substances, and you end up with mathematics or something like that. If you say that it's the study of something about like um, the study of knowing things by their causes, and then you end up with natural science, something like that. So, um, so also you make this we make the same mistake with inspiration, and he makes one thing which is people say that they're inspired, though it's their imagination which is stimulated, and not anything properly referred to to the rational soul, right? So that would be go against the definition that he's given here so far, which is that it's not just that it's what that the one of the soul is awakened, but that the one of the soul unites the whole rational soul, and so when it's just the imagination, it's not even the rational soul. Now, what he then talks about is that some people will say, well, what? So, like, this is like theories about what's going on when the oracle speaks. And she speaks in this hexameter verse that's really hard to understand. And some people will say, well, it's the humors in her body that are in that are in a funny way, right? Her blood and phlegm and things like that. And they'll explain that state of trance through bodily constitution. Other people will use the something about that. There's something about the environment that makes that happen, or maybe it's fumes rising from the ground, these exhalations, or maybe it has to do with the fact of being at the right time in the right place, which we can determine astrologically. And he said, well, these are all contributory and material causes. So it could very well be that you cannot actually get into a prophetic trance if you don't have the right diet and if you're not at the right time and place and there aren't these exhalations. These are all just material causes. The thing couldn't happen without these things, but they don't actually explain the things.
Okay, I get it.
Now he's going to give his account of the causes.
Okay, so we get to the well. So you have as efficient cause the inspiration of the gods. So the one who is doing it, the agent. As material cause, the inspired soul itself, because it's done to the soul, I guess. Or external symbols too. So if you use some kind of, how do you call it, like tools or something to cause the inspiration. And then they also get inspired somehow. I don't know. As a formal cause, the inspiration from the God in the region of the one of the soul, that's the definition of what inspiration is. As final cause, the good. Because, that's the final cause of everything, anyways. But if the gods always want what is good for the soul, why isn't it always inspired? So why is the soul not always inspired? They do want what is good for it, but they also want the order of the universe to prevail. And it is, for many reasons, not always conductive to that. Hence, it is not always inspired. He didn't give the reasons, many reasons.
No, well, um, the this goes back to the question of the material cause, right? So the material causes the inspired soul itself, or external symbols too, and also the he also called all these things that other people attribute inspiration to. He says that they are the contributory and material causes of the phenomenon. So the point is that in order for the soul to be inspired, there has to be certain conditions, which we just discussed, and they're not always present. Why aren't they always present? Well, because they depend on ultimately, they depend on the order of the whole universe. If we're talking about time and place and the motions of the heavens. So it's not always conducive for the good of the whole for them to for every soul to be inspired. Right? And you said, well, the good is the final cause of everything. So what's he saying? Saying the final cause is the good? Well, I guess I would prefer to think that he's not saying something trivial here. And so I guess there's some sense in which the good itself, in which the one itself is attained or made real, especially through through inspiration, right? So, since in inspiration, as he's explained, the one of the soul is activated and then the whole soul is unified. Well, that seems to be the greatest good. Like this seems to be the attainment of the good itself for the soul. So the final cause isn't something less than that. It's not just part of like the soul's realization, it's the whole good. And this also, the efficient cause actually has to be ultimately the same as the final cause in the Neoplatonic theory, right? Procession from is always procession from where to you revert. So if the efficient cause is the gods, Then the final cause is also going to be the gods. Here he described them in a different way as the good. That this ultimately falls together. Um, so so yeah, it's interesting these questions about why is the soul or why are humans beings not actually always like this? Um, Aristotle in Nicomachean Ethics Book 10 asks why does the soul not always feel pleasure? Right? And then he gives an account because it says, well, pleasure is activity. We're always active. Why or pleasure accompanies activity. We're always active. Why don't we always feel pleasure? And then he has this account like, oh, well, familiarity makes us not notice it, or something like that. But Heidegger later would ask why do we not always feel anxious? And things like that. It's interesting what puzzles philosophers about why are we not always in this way?
Fair.
Um, okay,
And that
now he's
this
gonna
is like what the like ecstatic kind of people wonder why we're not always mad. How do you call
yeah,
it? And the answer is
the
something like why isn't it always a holiday or something like that? Or why aren't all metals gold? I think that's the kind of question that it ends up being.
yeah, and the answer, it actually makes sense. Like if this is the activity of activating the one of the soul, well, much prior to that is the unity of all things, right? And so it makes sense that concerns about how the unity of all things is best realized will interfere with how the one of the soul can be realized.
Hmm. Okay. Um, Now, some say that telestic extends only as far as the sublunary sphere. I don't know what they would say or why. If by this they mean that nothing superlunary or celestial acts on on the sublunary region, they're clearly talking nonsense. And if they mean that the practitioners of telestic cannot operate above the moon sphere, we shall say that if all the spheres assigned to souls are sublunary, their statement will be true. But if there are also spheres assigned to soul in the region above the moon, and there are in fact, since some souls are attendants of the sun, some of the moon, some of Saturn, for he south, some on the earth, some of the sun, some elsewhere, and in the Timaeus, then it will also be possible for the soul to operate above the moon. For what is in the long term the whole order provides it with, uh, of the universe which provides it with the soul, will also be able to provide for itself in the short term by means of telestic with the assistance of the gods. For while it
Finish and
cannot,
I'll explain.
yeah, it cannot ever operate above its assigned sphere, it can operate up to the level of its assigned sphere. Just as, if for argument's sake, the assigned sphere of the soul extended as far as philosophy, the soul could, even if it did not choose a philosophical life but some other, be philosophically active to some degree during that life. And there are even said to be certain supermundane souls. That's how much and how the soul is inspired.
Right. So this seems to be a problem. There seems to be a problem about Telestic here. Telestic seems to be something that he's associating broadly with theurgy and ritual practice, and somehow also with inspiration, right? And how so telestic, it's a cognate with teletai with mysteries. Sometime in some contexts, it means specifically the activity of like animating statues. So you preparing a statue in such a way that it can give oracular responses. However, sometimes it's used more broadly and seems to mean ritual in general. And here it seems to be some technique for making souls inspired, right? And this is actually a really important passage for me for my whole reconstruction of many parts of Neoplatonism, because he tells us something about what Telestic is supposed to do, right? What theurgy is supposed to do. So he says theurgy is supposed to let the soul, even if it chose the wrong life, right, to act according to the life it should have chosen, right? So if you are a soul of let's say the moon, and so you're supposed to act, you're supposed to um help things grow, right? In some sense, you're supposed to nurture people, maybe children, or you're supposed to nurture plants or something. And yet you chose to become a soldier, right? You're cutting things down. Well, through Telestic, you can still somehow act together with the moon. And why is this important for him? Well, it's because the Telestic lets the soul act according to its full nature. Since the full nature of the souls is in some sense celestial, it is acting beyond the sublunary sphere, right? Why would someone maybe say that Telestic can only act in the sublunary sphere? Well, they might think theurgy is just magic. Theurgy is just using sympathetic connections so for you to act with one body on another, right? So, for you, for instance, you can make love potions and potions of repelling, and this means that you're acting on things that can be changed, right? In principle, and those are all in the sublunary sphere. But he says, well, no, you're acting on this other kind of thing that can be changed, which is the soul, and soul exists beyond the sublunary sphere, and including, the souls of the practitioners of Telestic. And then at the end, he also says, well, there's even supermundane souls, although that's even um, not so much the that's not he only adds that at the end probably because it's not so relevant because that doesn't really affect the people doing Telestic because the people who are here are not super mundane, they're not hypercosmic, right? Super mundane is hypercosmic, just using Latin words. And yeah, so I guess there's still a puzzle about why is this here. Perhaps it is the idea that maybe Telestic is about, in some sense, um, producing inspiration in a soul, and that's why it's here. So that's why it's relevant to the question about how the soul is inspired, right? And since Telestic is about inspiring the soul, and the soul is more than just a sublunary phenomenon, then Telestic is more than a sublunary phenomenon.
Hmm. Okay.
The initial thing that he says, if by this they mean that nothing superlunar is celestial acts on the sublunary region, they are clearly talking nonsense, right? Because in theurgy, who acts is the gods, and so it's clear that the agent is going to be above the super above the world of generation. Right?
Right. So that's more like that would be like saying that nothing beyond the moon acts below it or something like that.
Yeah,
And that's clearly nonsense, at least
that's clearly
for
not
any Neoplatonic thing that everything higher always acts all the way down.
right, but like I don't think any I'm not sure anyone thought this, even Aristotelians and Stoics. Well,
Hmm.
say that higher things work on lower things.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So one more question, but how is that? So that's a much about the soul is inspired. So he answered his general questions of what is inspiration for the soul, which part, how it's inspired, and so on. But how does that a statue is said to be inspired? Well, it certainly doesn't operate in its own right in the sphere of the divine, being a thing without a soul. Rather, Telestic, purifying its matter and conferring upon the statue certain symbols and tokens, has by these means first made it animate and caused it receive a kind of life from the cosmos, then gone on to make it ready to be illuminated by the divine. Such a statue continually gives out responses as long as suitable recipients are able to receive them. For the statue, once it is consecrated, telestai, remains effective thereafter until such time as it becomes totally unfit for the divine illumination. The recipient, on the other hand, is limited only by turns. So it becomes better than the person receiving answers from it. At one time, it stops receiving, and another time it is again filled. The reason is that once the soul is filled, it operates in its own right in the sphere of the divine, and for that reason grows weary from operating above its own power. It would be a god, unlike the souls of the stars, if it didn't grow weary. While as for the statue, as it fears, so does it remain illuminated. For that reason, unfitness for illumination on its part, leads to total loss of illumination, unless it is once more freshly consecrated and animated by the priest.
Right. So this is a difference. So like both souls and statues can be inspired. But the soul, since it is cooperating in the inspiration, it gets weary. Whereas since the statue is not doing anything of its own while it's being inspired, it doesn't get weary. However, it can be, it can become not fit for inspiration if, it gets dirty. The things that connect the symbols of the gods get washed away. It gets broken. It gets polluted. And then it has to be reconsecrated, right? The and then, but it seems like they are working in tandem. So it's when he says such a statue continually gives out responses as long as suitable recipients are able to receive them. So it seems then that you need both a statue and also say like a seer or an oracle, right? Ultimately, the well-prepared statue is something that aids the oracle for it, for them to be inspired, right? And the statue is, as long as it's pure and maintained in the right state, it's always inspired and illuminated. But the person, they get tired from what they're doing because they are living a life beyond their level.
You're right. So something like the statue being less alive is also something that helps it not get tired. That would be like the point, or not get tired
Yeah,
in the same as quickly as a human, or in the same way. It could sort of get
yeah,
tired in the way like materials get tired, like it could break or something like that.
exactly, exactly. Um, this is like saying that I don't know, like a sword never gets tired from fighting the way that a person who uses a sword gets tired from it.
Hmm. But okay, well, I guess like this inspiration of the statue is also somehow contingent on the soul making it inspired and using it, I guess. Like it's like not like a tree that falls in a forest that's useful without anyone using it.
Yeah, so of course, like the ritual expert, he has to purify it and y bring together the symbols of the god that's supposed to animate the statue, and um and the he seems to imply that it's in a state of passivity because it says that it makes it ready to be illuminated by the divine, and then such a statue continually gives out responses as long as suitable recipients are able to receive them. So yeah, it does seem to be a bit like the sword and not like the tree.
Hmm. Okay. So that's all. That inspiration, in the true sense, occurs in connection with one of the soul, and that inspiration and illumination from the gods has now been adequately explained. In what follows, let us deal with the order and use of the four kinds of madness and why the philosopher has mentioned only them. Was it because there were no others? Or was it because he was content with them for present purposes? That there are in fact other kinds of possession and madness he will himself indicate later, and has already alluded to it in what precedes, where he said, "Should I become nymph possessed?" which is one kind that was not mentioned here. And there are moreover those who are possessed by Pan, or by the mother of the gods. That was the Sibylle, and
Yeah.
sorbiantic frenzies. which he himself will mention elsewhere.
Right, Corybantic. So these are to do with dancing. They're mentioned in the laws, if I remember correctly.
He has told us only these four here. Firstly, because these on their own suffice the soul for its restoration, as we shall learn in what follows. Secondly, because he is giving those that impinge directly on the soul. 4. The gifts of the soul to all things are many and beyond the comprehension, but the moment is instructing us in the actions of the gods on souls, and is giving an account of all those four kinds of madness, not because it is the case that any one of them, especially the erotic, does not suffice to convert the soul, but because the whole series of them by rank and degree, and the perfection of the soul in a given rank, is currently being presented.
Right, but because what is currently being presented here is the whole series of madnesses by rank and degree, and by the appropriate perfection of the soul in a given rank. Right, that's what's currently being presented. So he's saying all of them convert to the soul, all of them turn the soul to the gods. However, he's talking of these four because refers to, each of them has a certain place in an order and is connected to a perfection of the soul in that order. Right? So this is like the connection with the idea of scale of virtues, right? So the perfections of the soul are very much like the perfections of the different parts of the soul. It's like of the rational, of the irrational, of the rational, of the noetic, and of the one of the soul. And so this is what the madnesses are talking about. It's about these different parts of the soul, and that's why he mentions all these four madnesses. Um, it's
Yes, please.
interesting why that so he mentions that there are these other madnesses mentioned elsewhere in Plato, and they're presumably also proper madnesses, right? Since they're not the kinds that were caused by daimones or something, right? Since it's he's discussing here now inspiration in the true sense. However, it seems that these four are connected with, directly on the soul. So I wonder if these others that he doesn't discuss here are connected to the body, maybe, or what's going on. That could be interesting. So they would be, as it were, madnesses that go further than all these other kinds of madness. Because if every true madness starts from the one of the soul, then one that reaches all the way down to our bodies, that would be, and not just the soul, that would go further in a sense. And maybe indeed, if we think that the Corybantic one is about dancing, it could be that these other ones are all connected with the body somehow. Um, right. So but this will become clearer in the sense in which that they all convert the souls and the order that they're given in the ranks, right? Will become clearer when we discuss when we get to the um details. I noticed here that we're a bit past time.
Yeah.
Do you want to so next week, the 29th? Is that fine?
Next week, let me check. I don't even know my calendar. This is the 29th, which is what? Yeah, we should try to do next week, yeah. The week after, probably we'll have to skip, but next week should be fine.
Okay. Well, so I'll see you next week and have a good one.
Thank you.